2 years into the war in Ukraine, and the sheer violence of this conflict still has the power to be breathtaking. I'm standing here in the crater of a recent Russian missile strike a few miles outside the capital, Kyiv, that was probably caused by a North Korean KN-23 missile. The crater itself is at least 30 or 40 feet wide, 12 feet deep. This has become the new normal for people living right across Ukraine. This is just one of the hundreds of the thousands of drone and missile strikes that hit this country, right across this country, almost on a daily and nightly basis. The story of this war has been written in the scars on the landscape, and more importantly, in the scars left on people's lives, the hundreds, the tens of thousands of people who've been maimed, who've been killed, who've been displaced as a result of Vladimir Putin's invasion. This crater is probably 30 to 40 foot wide, maybe 10 or 12 foot deep, and in many ways it's lucky that it landed in sandy ground in a patch of forest outside the city. Unclear what, if anything, the Russians were aiming at, but the power of this blast is really evident from the hundreds of feet in all directions of trees that were blown down and burnt by that explosion, by that shockwave. I was in Ukraine 2 years ago on the day the war broke out, and inevitably some of the dread and the terror and the fear that I felt on February 24th at sort of 4 in the morning when we woke up to news that the invasion had started, some of that fear has faded. The war has almost started to become normal for me, as I'm sure it has perhaps for many of you, and certainly to an extent as it has for many of the people living here in Ukraine. But nonetheless, it still keeps its power to shock, and the way that Ukrainians have adapted to that conflict, the resilience that they've shown in the face of 2 years of Russian aggression, is quite extraordinary. With flowers and colourful pictures on the walls, toys on the tables, in many ways this is like an ordinary classroom. The pupils behind me here are in the middle of a maths class, but what makes this different is that we're underground. Those are the extractor fans of the Kharkiv metro, and in fact this is one of 5 underground schools in this city, because this city continues to face the daily bombardment of Russia's missiles and drones, and so the pupils here have to live, or have to study underground, because the risk of being above ground is too great. Again, more signs of normal school, crash mats, colourful posters, toys for the pupils to play with, but in fact this is an underground platform. This used to be a busy station in the Kharkiv metro, and behind these walls here, which have only been temporarily erected, in fact the trains are still running. The Kharkiv metro is running. You might even be able to hear the sound of a train passing as I'm speaking. This is the new reality for people in this city, Ukraine's second city. Parts of life, school, normal life, education has moved underground, because that's the safest way for pupils to learn, away from, or at least protected temporarily while they're here, from the risk of the Russian bombardments. It is really remarkable to see the way, not just here in Kharkiv but across Ukraine, the way that people have adapted to their new reality. And this is just one of the ways, but not every city can do this. Not every city has a metro like Kharkiv's where pupils can learn with spaces big enough for pupils to learn. Kharkiv is, in that sense, slightly unique. It's Ukraine's second biggest city. It has a really well-established metro, but it's also so close to the Russian border that it has continued to face one of the most devastating onslaughts of missiles, drones, rockets and artillery shells since the very first day of the war, when you may remember it repelled a Russian tank assault. And from that point onwards, it really has been on the front line. Russian forces drove into the city. I was here 2 years ago when special forces drove right into the city. It was astonishing. But they were then pushed out to the city's edges. They were then pushed out and pushed further back. And by the end of 2022, the first year of the war, Russian forces had been forced to retreat from the city. And at that point, it was no longer in range of some of Russia's guns, but it continues to be in range of weapons such as the S-300 missile system, which is repeatedly used to attack this city. It's also worth noting that next to the normal paraphernalia of a school, even a school underground, there's another sign that this is a country at war, and these are the posters like this one, reminding people not to touch what may be mines or unexploded ordnance that's been scattered around the city, the countryside, their homes in these 2 years of bombardments that they've endured. The human cost of this war has really been brought home to me recently by news that a friend of mine was killed in the Ukrainian retreat from Avdiivka. The soldier I knew as Kirill, his full name was Kirilo Ulman, was helping to stave off a Russian attempt to encircle the town, which Russia has since captured. Kirill was a man I'd met half a dozen times over the course of this 2-year war. I met him a few days after Russia invaded, when he had signed up as a volunteer. He was a civilian entrepreneur who signed up to fight and defend his country. And then I saw him half a dozen times on the front lines, mostly around Bakhmut, before and after that town fell last summer. Kirill's friends told me that he was helping to stave off, to delay the Russian attempt to encircle Avdiivka, and in so doing he surely saved many of his comrades' lives as they were able to evacuate. But in the chaos of that withdrawal, his body was left behind and his comrades have been unable to recover it. Russia claimed full control of the town, the blood-soaked town which has been the focus of its fury, a few days after Kirill was killed. And without the prospect of any significant breakthroughs on the battlefield on the horizon, without the prospect of any meaningful peace talks on the horizon, it's hard to see as we look forward how there won't be many more people like Kirill who pay the ultimate price in this conflict.